Are you a giver or a taker? How much do you write off as charitable deductions at tax time? Generosity means one thing to an accountant, but something very different to a scientist. I'm Professor Vanessa Ruiz. You're watching Catalyst. This YouTube edition of Catalyst is brought to you by Arizona PBS and Arizona State University. Life has problems. Science turns them into questions that can lead to solutions and even innovations. Welcome to Catalyst, shaping the future through science research at Arizona State University. This time, we're showing you how researchers are looking for answers to one of those big questions. What is generosity? And does it play a measurable role in human success and survival? They're going around the world searching for answers. To the harsh highlands of Mongolia, where herders depend on their livestock and each other to stay alive. They're also studying people in Central Africa, where they live with the constant threat of violence and food shortages. Researchers have been working with people living in the South Pacific, Fiji, where devastating storms can batter this island paradise and leave people desperate for help. But they're also working closer to home, in rural eastern Kentucky and on the desert rangelands between Arizona and New Mexico. There are 9 field sites in all, with different people, different places, different customs and ways to practice and measure generosity. All of it has one name, the Human Generosity Project. So let's start in Mongolia.
Hello, everybody. Today I'm doing one of the most fun things I've done my entire year in this country. I'm shoveling crap.
My name is Tom, and I am an anthropologist working with the Human Generosity Project, and I supervise the Mongolia field site. And this is the families, it's called a hasha, the fence that we're living in. And this is what a typical family's camp looks like. If you have a cashmere sweater, chances are it came from goats in Central Eurasia. I work as an anthropologist, and I study specifically human behavior and human behavioral evolution. So how our behaviors and our psychology have developed through time as a species. And I specifically study cooperation and generosity and sharing behavior. And my research is based in northern Mongolia with nomadic herders. So people who move from season to season, they live in felt tents, and they herd sheep and goats and horses and yaks and cows and sometimes camels too. The first thing you experience for most of the year there is how cold and harsh the environment is. Temperatures can go down to between -40 and -60 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter. As somebody who's not from that community, it's the first thing you experience, and it's something that hits you very hard and takes a long time to get used to. One thing that you're struck by is just the expansiveness of the landscape. It's a country with the lowest population density on Earth, and it's very wide, very open, but there are a lot of animals on the landscape. So you're struck by how open it is, but at the same time, how densely populated it is in terms of how many livestock they have grazing on the natural grassland there. One thing that struck me most is the necessity of cooperation and the absolute necessity due to the naturally occurring conditions. So it's such a harsh place, and it's such a difficult place to make a living, that people really need to cooperate on an everyday basis to get very labor-intensive activities accomplished. So they're not really working with one another just to everyday graze their livestock, but they are working together to accomplish these very labor-intensive activities that happen periodically throughout the year. So things like migrating from place to place, from one pasture that they spend one season on to the next one. And also things like preparing for the winter and getting their supplies and their camps ready to be able to keep their livestock alive during the course of the harshest months of the year. Here's one of the goats. As you can see, this season of the year, she's pretty fat and pretty healthy looking. There are about 250 or 300 sheep here. And the family's been working really hard over the course of the summer and the fall to put as much weight on the animals as possible. At times, the decisions that they're making, I would say, are a matter of life and death, because their sole livelihood, most of these people, is livestock product. And so that's where they're making most of their income from. And in a sense, your livestock are your insurance policy. There are natural hazards on the landscape, one being just the temperature, and two being just the remoteness of the landscape, your distance from the next group of people. So if you need help getting to that help. And sometimes the conditions are so bad that you can't even drive a truck around. So they really do depend on each other on an everyday basis to survive. There's a custom where if you're in need, you can go into anybody's camp and they'll feed you and let you stay for the night. So nobody lets anyone else freeze to death.
Cooperation and generosity, altruism, all of these terms, they're really complex ideas, and we bring a lot of our sort of assumptions and baggage to the table when we even use those words.
Athena's role in the Human Generosity Project is co-director. She and I are both co-directors of the project. We divide up the work in the project based on our disciplinary focuses. I'm the anthropologist, so I primarily supervise the field work. She's the psychologist, so she primarily supervises laboratory work and computer-based modeling.
While Lee Kronk and Athena activists coordinate findings from the universities, the field researchers are on the front lines, gathering firsthand examples of cooperation. One of those locations is in Uganda, where the Ik people have historically been given an undeserved reputation when it comes to generosity.
They have an ethic of generosity and sharing that's quite strong, and it's reinforced by a belief in a supernatural punishment and reward system monitored by these earth spirits that live on the landscape that they refer to as Kijowik. So the Kijowik are these spirits on the landscape that keep track of people's behavior and reward people who are generous and punish people who are stingy.
I am an anthropologist, and I'm on the Ik field site. The Ik people are a group of former hunter-gatherers in northeastern Uganda on the border with Kenya and near the border of South Sudan. And they are interesting because they live in a situation of extreme need. There is a lot of hardship in their environment. They often face drought-stricken conditions and very often have shortages of food, as well as attacks from neighboring peoples. The other hardships I faced were the very same hardships that Ik people themselves face: lack of food, lack of security, so the sort of idea that the community might come under attack by neighboring peoples, not having access to electricity, to running water very easily during the dry periods. Sometimes there was a complete shortage of water, which would mean sort of getting the dregs of water at the bottom of wells. So the day-to-day kind of generosity that they practice is just helping each other out, maybe sharing food with their neighbors if their neighbors are having a shortage.
Members of this Ik village have lived through violence, and they remember that experience through this ritual ceremony. Dancers pose as attackers who carried automatic rifles. In this dance, the tribe keeps that memory alive. It's called the Dance of Raids.
The fact that they are sometimes facing these attacks from neighbors, they actually have to come together to defend themselves and to escape from those attacks. If a whole village is experiencing a shortfall, or they're experiencing a drought perhaps, or being attacked, then they might actually move the whole village to a different part of Ik land and join another village and pull together with those people. One of the interesting things that I was doing is to run economic games among the Ik. People were making decisions involving actual small sums of money that they could share with other people. The people that seemed to be outliers in terms of giving the most were people that had had some kind of direct personal experience of violence. It may be that people who have experienced violence in a very direct way have a kind of life-changing experience that makes people aware of how interdependent they are on other people. There are people who are doing better than others, and they are able to help those who are not doing so well.
The team's research is disproving an outdated study about the Ik people. That old study claimed the Ik were stingy and cruel. But at the time the study was made, they were in a state of crisis.
So they were in terrible shape. People did not have enough food to eat, and they were in a situation where if they were to help someone else, they would be putting their own survival at risk. So sharing with other people just was not an option. That's what we refer to as synchronous needs. But if needs are asynchronous, if not everybody is in need simultaneously, if some people are still doing okay, then they're able to help those that are in serious need. And that, fortunately for human beings, that's usually the case. Usually there's somebody who's doing well enough that they can help out.
Even these people who had this terrible reputation for being mean and not being generous are actually people that in reasonable circumstances will try to avoid hardships or manage hardships through sharing and helping behaviors.
A place where it's never hotter than about 80 degrees, never much colder than about 75, and almost always sunny. For centuries, Europeans thought of the South Pacific island of Fiji as a paradise. But Fijians also face the threat of massive cyclones. Those devastating storms can create sudden, desperate needs for many people living on that island.
We're also extremely interested in how do people help each other in need when there are natural disasters, immediately afterwards, then also in the sort of longer term.
And we see that in Fiji. At our field site in Fiji, one of the main sources of need is cyclones, hurricanes. Fiji gets hit routinely by cyclones, and they're just terribly destructive, just like hurricanes are when they hit the United States. And in that circumstance, you can have an entire village that is in need, an entire village that's been wiped out essentially in terms of their housing. And when that happens, they scale up.
And it's almost like there's this sort of shift in the scale where the helping is happening, because when you have these disasters, a whole village may get hit at once, but a neighboring village might be okay. And so people are kind of adapting the ways that they're asking for help.
And they call upon a more distant village, a village farther away that wasn't hit so badly by the hurricane, and they help out.
One of the really interesting things that's starting to emerge from that data is that when people are just asking for help and giving help in day-to-day life, they're usually asking the people who are near to them, their close kin, people who are in the same village. But when a natural disaster happens, like for them, a hurricane, then you see this shift where people are asking for help and giving help to people who are in villages that are further away, to more distant friends and family.
And they can know that they can do that because they maintain relationships with these villages through ritual exchanges. They exchange ritual objects on a routine basis so that they have these relationships to help. Fijians also have a system of need-based transfers, of giving to those in need. They call it kari-kari. And the Fijian ethic is that if any Fijian is in need, and if you're able to help that person, you're supposed to step up and help that Fijian. I first started working on cooperation and generosity at my field site in Kenya. I work with people called the Maasai, and they have a system of sharing, of mutual support, mutual aid, called osotwa. Osotwa means literally umbilical cord, but they use it to refer to relationships that they set up with each other where they agree to take on each other's risk.
The two very simple rules of osotwa, which are you only ask if you're in genuine need, and if you're asked, then you give if you're able.
And I was expecting it to be a sort of a tit-for-tat reciprocity system, a system where people give gifts back and forth, because those exist. But when I started talking to people about it and learning more about how the system worked, I found out that that's not how it works at all, that it's not something where you have to give something back and forth. In fact, the flow of help, of goods and services, mostly livestock, might be entirely in one direction throughout somebody's lifetime if one partner is consistently unlucky and the other partner is consistently lucky. And that's okay.
The first step in generosity is knowing that someone is in need. But some cultures have traditions that make it hard to know that someone needs help. One of those places is in Appalachia, rural eastern Kentucky.
I'm Helen Vashilewski, and I'm an anthropologist, and I'm the field site supervisor for the Central Appalachia site. Coming a couple hours away from the mountains of eastern Kentucky, I had heard a lot about what these people were like prior to going, and I expected some degree of hostility and some fear of maybe outsiders or something. I didn't encounter that at all. People were very friendly, very welcoming to me, very warm. The style of communication is different. The pace of life is quite a bit slower. It's now kind of a mix, so people are buying things at the store. 50 or 60 years ago, they really weren't. Maybe once a month you would go to the store and get staples like sugar, coffee, and flour, and canning throughout to maintain yourself through the winter. These days, people do buy things at the store just like anywhere else, but the people who are sustaining themselves through it with subsistence practices will have little gardens, and they can be pretty big in terms of a garden, but it's referred to as a garden. It could be an acre. And hunting is very commonly done, and foraging. The way that people ask for or request assistance from others, it tends to be indirect. So rather than directly going to someone and saying, I need help with a particular task around my house, or I need assistance with something, or I need to borrow something, rather you would just wait to see if somebody else notices that you have a need. So directly asking for something for yourself is not considered culturally appropriate.
One of the greatest challenges to generosity can be distance. The project team has also been looking here at the tough, dry borderland between Arizona and New Mexico. An area called Malpay, Badlands. How does generosity work when there's a vast space between neighbors?
I'm Rich Winkler, a local rancher in the Rodeo and Animas Valley. We've been ranching there almost my entire life.
My name is Billy Darnell from Animas, and been ranching and in this country all my life. I've known Richie when he was in diapers, actually, and we watch out for each other's cattle and keep each other appraised of what's going on, and just being neighborly.
Neighboring is a broad term. It refers to all the ways in which they help each other. So sometimes they help each other on a sort of regular basis where they swap favors back and forth. You're going to need help when you're rounding up your livestock, so I'll help you do that, and in exchange, you'll help me when I need to round up my livestock.
When I grew up in this valley, you can drive by the time you were 8 years old, and you could ride a horse by the time you were 5, for sure. There were a lot of small family-owned ranches here in this valley, and there still are today. We have 16 ranches that know each other, and we interact at a minimum of 4 times a year. We see everybody, but more than that, we see each other within the community. That's how we find out things, not necessarily through a cell phone, but face-to-face conversations. We have the saying that there's a moccasin telegraph in a small community. Word travels faster through the moccasin telegraph than it does through the internet around here at times. Most of us grew up without TV, but to learn the ropes of working on ranches, you would go help several different ranches in the area in the fall and in the spring.
Ranchers' days start early and can cover a lot of ground.
From the time I get up, anywhere from 4 to 6 o'clock in the morning is typical There's a list of priorities, obviously feeding our string of horses and checking all the waters here on the ranch, the fencing, putting up hay, those kinds of things, working on corrals.
We constantly have to repair fence. We'll have cattle get out on the highway. We're having to monitor our waters for our cattle due to a water situation or trough leaking. And then we also have to be flexible because oftentimes our plans are changed. It's just a constant day-to-day thing of being aware of your surroundings. And then, of course, the cattle business, we sell about 200,000 pounds of beef every year to feed people. And, you know, it's what we do, it's our livelihood.
You do have this sense when you're there of this vastness and the vulnerability that comes with that as well.
And we do have problems almost weekly with smugglers cutting the fences and leaving the gates open.
And knowing those difficulties at times lends itself to neighbors helping each other.
Another form it takes is a sort of a spontaneous response to need when need arises out of the blue. So if somebody on a ranch gets sick or injured, which is often the case, then the neighbors just step up and help out and make sure the work gets done on that ranch.
Your neighbor usually knows and will offer help. I know that we help our neighbors from time to time, whether that be, working with cattle or breakdowns in terms of trucks or trailers and things like that. If they're in poor health, offering to help with their ranch if they were in need of that, if they were hurt or injured, those would be commonplace here.
Just out of neighborliness. Not expecting anything in return, but just because they realize there's a need there, the need needs to get met. And of course, they may be the needy ones tomorrow.
You have good neighbors that will help you, and then you have neighbors that won't do anything. So you live and you learn.
But knowing each other, that if he needed help, then it would go without saying that I would come and help him, maybe on the ranch or his family or any of those things.
Having that network of people they can depend on is why that way of living that is so hard is still working, because they know that they have people who they can depend on. And when bad things happen, people are there, people come and help.
We've had situations where some of us in the community, our neighboring ranchers, have passed away, some of them suddenly, and all of us step up and help them work their cattle and fix fences and do their chores in times of need. It's just in our nature to do that.
People being studied in the field sites of the Human Generosity Project share many traits and sometimes meet, even if it means traveling to the other side of the globe.
We had a group of people from the Maasai tribe come here and stay with us, and it was amazing how many commonalities that we had. 2 people from our group went to Africa, and they saw the ranching operation here, and then two of our members of our group went over there and saw how they did things, and we helped them with building dirt ponds, dirt tanks, and showed them some of the things that had been successful for us. But it was amazing at how many things we had in common with other ranchers on a different continent. And we were willing to help them with that. And we were happy to do that. And I'm sure they would reciprocate if we asked them. I think people's hearts are usually in the right place when it comes to things like that. I think that people, especially as you get to know them, I think those are things that you can relate to as you know someone. And that's how generosity happens, is by people knowing one another.
The Human Generosity Project has more questions to answer and more places to go to get those answers. I'm Professor Vanessa Ruiz. You've been watching Catalyst, our show about shaping the future, how research creates real-life results. And because our lives always have new problems that science can help solve, we'll be back soon with more stories.
Catalyst is supported by Knowledge Enterprise Development at Arizona State University advancing entrepreneurship, innovation, discovery, and knowledge for the public good.
Subscribe to this channel to see more episodes of Catalyst on YouTube.